I'm Claudia Dean with the AAPOR Heritage Committee, and I'm very pleased to be here today in mid-August 2011 with Andrew Kohut, who has graciously agreed to be interviewed for AAPOR's Heritage Interview Series. A quick bio of Andy. He's currently the president of the Pew Research Center here in Washington, D.C. He's also the director and founder of the Pew Research Center for the People and the Press, which some of you know is formerly the Times-Mirror Center for the People and the Press. And he's the director of the Pew Global Attitudes Project. In these capacities, he's frequently called on to comment on and interpret public opinion on television, in magazines, newspapers, blogs, and he's a frequent commentator on NPR. He's also found time to co-author 4 books. Prior to his work with Pew, Andy founded and ran Princeton Survey Research Associates, an opinion research firm, and before that he had a long and successful career at the Gallup organization, culminating in his 10 years as its president from 1979 to 1989. He's a graduate of Seton Hall University and studied graduate sociology at Rutgers. In terms of his AAPOR involvement, Andy served as president of AAPOR from 1994 to 1995, received the organization's first ever Innovators Award in 2000 and AAPOR's Award for Exceptionally Distinguished Achievement in 2005. He also, on a personal note, gave me my first job in survey research, so don't expect any hard-hitting questions here. Andy, welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed. We really appreciate it.
Delighted to be here.
All right, now I have the advantage interviewing you of your having been interviewed many times before. I keep finding these clips that say Andrew Kohut, power player. So I know that you famously have told the story that the reason you got into polling was because you needed health insurance. Can you tell me the truth of that story? Is that a rumor? Is that true?
No, that's absolutely true.
Tell us how you got started.
My wife was pregnant, and it was going to cost $600 to have this baby delivered. And I had an assistantship at Rutgers, which paid $2,300, and I couldn't save $600 out of this $2,300. So I went to my professor, and I said, what should I do, the one who had the assistantship with? And he said, well, why don't you go, maybe get a part-time job at Gallup. And so I got a part-time job at Gallup, and they gave me $85 a week for part-time work, and I was able to save my $600 to pay for this baby. And that's how I got into public opinion polling, through lack of universal health coverage.
Subject near and dear to our hearts here. So did you name the baby George or Gallup?
No, he's Matthew.
He's got his own name.
He's Matthew.
What? So you were studying sociology, but nothing related to survey research. It really was a clean slate when you came to Gallup, or you had a sense?
Not really. I was most taken with survey methodology. Rutgers had a great methodologist there, Matilda White Riley, and I was just intrigued by the things that I was learning from her. And so when I went to the Gallup organization, I really got pushed into the world of survey research in a variety of formats, and it was just a great experience.
What was it like then? What was Gallup like then? Where were they in there? Already quite famous.
Famous but small, and as
really?
as I thought, very undervalued and needing growth. And I had the great pleasure of not only working with Dr. Gallup, the pioneer in this field, but also working for Paul Perry, his statistician and chief methodologist who created the Gallup election model. And Paul was a wonderful teacher, and I learned more about survey research from Paul than anyone else. He was one of the key people who influenced my career.
Yeah, tell me more about him and your relationship with him. Was he friendly to you when you were just starting, or was he forbidding, or what sort of character?
I don't know if he was forbidding. He was very quiet and very withdrawn, and he gave me an assignment, I think in '67, to help him work on changes to the turnout scale. And, this was a series of questions that Gallup uses and still use, and we use to predict who votes and who doesn't. And we would do validation surveys of which of our respondents actually voted. We'd have the interviewers go to the precincts and look them up. So we knew which questions worked and which questions did not. And Paul was always trying to reduce the error associated with misclassification, and it was a great pleasure to work on something so complicated with him. But I not only got that exposure, but I learned so much about the practical approach to survey sampling that we at the Gallup organization and other and other commercial and media people had to undertake in order to fit our budgets and also fit our time schedules.
And were they doing things differently at Gallup than their peers at the time, or where were they in terms of this?
Well,
would you say more sophisticated in terms of the election polling? Or?
I think much more rigorous in terms of election polling, and the survey and the sampling approaches were comparable to what was going on in the commercial world, but nothing like what would happen in the academic world, where surveys could take 6 months and they had enormous budgets to get high completion rates. I mean, we were not only sampling people, we were sampling within a frame of within a time frame. If you're doing an election poll or in a public opinion poll of on some pressing issue, taking 6 months to complete it doesn't help you, because the election will have come and gone. In any event, Paul was a great master of understanding the way things should be done, and then taking that and tweaking it to what was possible within
in the real world.
In the real world, yeah.
And how did you progress from having sort of a part-time job where you were just trying to earn money at Gallup to where you eventually became president of the organization? When did you realize, you know what, I think I like this better than grad school? Or
I was seduced pretty early. I didn't last in graduate school very long. Because I was learning so much more. I was so intrigued by what I was learning. I was working on tracking studies. I was working on experiments. I loved to do experiments, and we would do these experimental designs. We had a national personal interview survey once a month. We had big, complicated, what we called custom surveys that had pretty elaborate designs. There was much of what I worked on was commercial. It wasn't public opinion research. I never did public opinion research whatsoever until the mid-1970s. I did market research, yeah.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
And I learned a lot doing market research. I think there were a lot of people in our business who started in market research.
And what did you do? I mean, what was the next job, and what was the next job? What was your way up? Because you... Well,
the first job where I was not someone's assistant setting up tables or writing drafts of report was I was assigned to Columbia Pictures.
Ooh, that sounds glamorous.
To do surveys about motion pictures. Gallup had done surveys about motion pictures throughout the 30s and 40s. That was where it really made its name commercially. And that went into, there was a long period after the collapse of the motion picture business, and not the collapse, but the downsizing of it, where that wasn't so relevant. So they got this contract from Columbia Pictures. And I had a great buddy there, the director of research there, and I would do wonderful things. I mean, I worked on obscure movies, from something called The Swimmer, which no one probably remembers, to Easy Rider.
Wow.
And
wait, what were you doing? What were you
surveying? Well, with Easy Rider, we had a way of testing what we thought the commercial appeal of a movie would be. Motion pictures were not released all at once. They still aren't. They were released very slowly, and if they were bad movies, they would break them fast before the word got out. So if they were good movies, they would take a different approach. In any event, I got this report about Easy Rider, which showed that the first night audience liked it better than did New York women who watched Funny Girl. And I thought, my God.
This is going to be big.
This is going to be big. In any event, that sort of thing. We also did title tests. We did market tests about how to market movies. In any event, that was one thing. And then what really made my career move was that I became involved in syndicated surveys, where we would come up with an idea that we could sell to market research departments, or we could sell to public affairs departments, and sell the same survey to a variety of people. And I was pretty good at ginning up ideas about what kinds of surveys to sell. And so that led to some success and some movement for me. And then in 1979, when Paul Perry retired, I became the president of the Gallup organization, and I was that till 1989. In that interim period, Dr. Gallup passed away in 1984, and then in 1989, Gallup was sold, and I was very much in favor of that. I was instrumental in the sale, but once I had been there for a year, with new management and people that I liked and who liked me, I decided, you know, I'd spent my whole career here and 20 years, and I needed to do something different.
Time to move. And so why did you decide to strike out on your own? This is when you left Gallup and you decided to found Princeton Survey Research Associates. You stayed in the neighborhood. What was the field like then, the sort of, that you felt there was an opening or a niche? Or?
Well, I didn't know whether there was an opening or a niche, but I felt that I could find the sort of work that I was interested in doing as opposed to the things I had to do in order to keep the wolf away from the door if it was just me. But then it wasn't just me. People came from Gallup relatively quickly. Diane Colasanto joined me, I think, 2 months later, and we built a little firm quickly. At the same time, I became the survey director for the Times Mirror Center for the People and the Press. Part of this was also the appeal of working on the Times Mirror surveys.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about that? People may not be familiar about how that started and who they were at the time. What was Times Mirror?
Times Mirror is the publishing company that owned the Los Angeles Times, the Baltimore Sun, the Dallas Morning News in those days. Hartford Courant was a very big media company. And we at Gallup got a contract from them in 1985 through another person who was instrumental in developing my career, Don Kellerman, and we did a survey, a very comprehensive survey about how the American public felt about the news media. There was some issues then about declining believability and credibility, and our survey went on to say, while there are some issues, there was still a good deal of support.
Was that market research for them, or
no,
they wanted to publish it in their newspapers?
They wanted to publish it.
It was
It was very, very successful. It was not only in the Los Angeles Times, it was on the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post. And after that, Don Kellerman said, well, this was quite a successful venture. Let's do a series of other surveys. And we did something, a number of surveys, but the most important of which was in 1987. We established our surveys of political values and typology, political typology, which clusters people into segments who are homogeneous in terms of beliefs, not only with respect to party affiliation, but values seen through the prism of party affiliation. And that was very successful. When we released that, believe it or not, the New York Times devoted a full page to writing the results, as did the Washington Post.
And they weren't affiliated with the Times
these were very successful surveys because
people weren't doing them, or people weren't doing them outside academe, or
well, they had the depth of academic surveys, but they were done with an alacrity and a focus on the issues of the day in ways in which academic surveys typically are not. And so they got a great deal of pickup. Our objective was to try to do these surveys very comprehensively, but do them quickly and write them in a way that would be accessible to ordinary people and to policymakers.
And you were issuing actual reports. I mean, what product were you?
We were releasing reports.
Right. So you would analyze it in-house and then work with their reporters, whichever reporters.
Well, no, we would write our own reports, and
right.
The Los Angeles Times would write write reports on them, or the Baltimore Sun.
Right.
But we were also we were aiming it at an audience broader than just the Times Mirror news organizations.
Was anyone else doing that? I mean, who would be your peers or competitors?
There were no competitors.
There were none. Yeah.
And so I continued doing that through Princeton Survey Research when after I had left Gallup, and then in 1993, Don Kellerman retired, and the folks in Los Angeles asked me if I wanted to take his job. And I went back and forth. I had my own company, which was then increasingly successful, not only with Times Mirror, but then with a variety of things. And I said, yes, I'll do it. And so I stayed on with both Princeton Survey Research and Times Mirror, but I worked full-time with Princeton Survey Research. More of the responsibility then shifted to Diane Colasanto.
Right. And then you're known now as the Pew guy. Who's that pollster with Pew? I mean, you've started this national brand, but you've told us the beginning stories. When did that transition happen, and can you tell us about that and from Times Mirror sponsoring the surveys to the Pew Trust coming in?
1995, Times Mirror had a new chairman who came in and cut a lot of things. It was the first round of media
Right.
cuts. And they shut down New York Newsday. They shut down all kinds of things that Times Square had been developing, among them our center. And they gave me a year or 6 months to find a new supporter, and I was lucky enough to meet Rebecca Reimel at the Pew Charitable Trust, and I told her what I did, and I said, you probably don't want to work with me because we do things our way and we do them independently, and she said, I'll give you a try. And I said, okay. And so in 1996, we made a transition from the Times Mirror Center for the People of the Press to the Pew Research Center.
Now, can you say a little bit more? You were given the Innovators Award for founding the center, and I want to talk about what it's become, because it's become something quite big. But right now, I think with sort of the obviousness of hindsight, it seems natural that a philanthropy would fund something like an independent research center, or now that philanthropies are funding media organizations. But then that was not at all. It seems right.
Yeah,
it would be very unusual.
Yeah, we had when Times Mirror cut me, I had interest from other foundations, but Rebecca really got the value of independent information and doing the kinds of survey research that we were doing on issues and politics in great depth without having a dog in the fight, and doing a good job of telling the story so that it was accessible to not only scholars but to the public and the political leaders.
Do you think they were worried at all at first about what you'd come up with? I mean,
well, they may have been, but they didn't. They didn't.
Right.
They didn't betray any of that. I think the first thing I did was I did a survey in New Hampshire, which showed that Buchanan. I can't remember who made the move on the the reporters didn't know who the Pew Center for the People in the Press. They called, "Who are you?" I said, "It's Andy Kohut." I said, "Oh." And in any event, and then I remember Pew getting those calls, and they were deluged with reporters saying, "You've got politics. Buchanan ahead." I can't remember if it was Buchanan or who it was. In any event, so that worked out pretty well. I got a renewal 2 years later, and subsequent renewals, and then in 2004. We brought together not only the Center for the People in the Press and Global Attitudes, which had developed in 2002.
What is that? Maybe you should say.
In 19, one of the really memorable moments of my research career was I did surveys for Times Mirror for more than 2 years as the Soviet Union was collapsing in Eastern Europe and in the Soviet republics, and they were great. And I was the survey expert, and Madeleine Albright was the Soviet specialist, and we had a great time.
Yes, I remember hearing a lot of stories about these travels.
So we just learned so much, and it was so much fun documenting something so dramatic and
You
heroic.
went in there though before the Soviet Union collapsed, right? This project was set up to look at that block of countries before you knew the wall was going to come down.
This project was set up to look at the unification of Europe. In Europe, it was called Europe 91. I can't remember what the catchphrase was. But before we get off the ground, the Berlin Wall fell, and then we shifted focus, and we did focus groups, we did surveys, and then we did our major round of surveys in 20 years ago, in 1991. And so I love those surveys, and Madeleine did too. And when she was leaving her post as Secretary of State, I went up to her and said, "We've talked all of these years that when you got out of office, we would resume our survey work." And she said, let's do it. So we made a pitch to Pew to give us some funding for a Global Attitudes project to study democratization and globalization.
Wow.
And on September 10th, 2001, I was up talking to the director of the UN Foundation it was some high-ranking UN person whose name has flown out of my head. And I looked out the window and I said, "What in the world could be more relevant than democratization?"
September 10th,
September 10th,
2001.
I went home, and the situation changed, and we quickly shifted gears, and our surveys and global attitudes came to be polls about the image of the United States, views about anti-terrorism efforts, American Power, and all sorts of things. And so that was one of the components of the survey programs that we brought together under the Pew Research Center. Also the Internet Project, which had been a spin-off of work that we had been doing. In fact, I think you were there yourself when we first started that. And a media project run by Tom Rosenstiel, also a LA Times, a former LA Times reporter. The Pew Hispanic Center, and then we set up a social and domestic trends project run by Paul Taylor.
And so all those were operating as sort of under separate grants, and then what you're saying is eventually...
They all came under the aegis of the Pew Research Center, yeah.
And what inspired you to do that, or is that, do you think that's the way things are moving?
Well, Rebecca Reimel and I got together one day, and she said, you know, we have to do something to make sure this continues after you and I are no longer in the picture. And one way to do it would be to build a stronger institution than just these freestanding projects. And I said, great idea.
Is it a think tank? I mean, how do you define it?
We define it as a fact tank, where what we're doing is we're putting out information, analyzed and described in a way that we think tells the story. And we not only do survey research, we do a lot of analysis of demographic trends, and we have some good economists and demographers there as well.
Brought in a lot of talent over time.
Yep, very proud of it.
Now, some of these topics have really grabbed you personally, and you've gone on to write about them more extensively. And one, you just noted your most recent book, is about attitudes towards America, gleaned from your interviews around the world. Can you just say a little bit about that research and, you know, post 9/11?
Yeah, I mean, what we learned in the post 9/11 environment was the ways in which American power and the use of American power became an issue in the Bush years. And America was very poorly regarded in the aftermath of the war in Iraq. And issues arose not only in the Muslim world, where the American image went from bad to worse, but also amongst our allies and in all parts of the world. And what we attempted to do was document how this was happening and where the United States was having success and where it was not.
And you're surveying in some very difficult to survey places. Can you just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, I had a fair amount of experience in international research when I was at the Gallup organization. We had something called Gallup International, and so I knew some of the polling vendors and the polling organizations, and mostly market research agencies in places like Pakistan and in the Middle East. But Mary McIntosh from Princeton Survey Research is a specialist in this, and you know, we had a pretty good working model of how to make arrangements and deals with the best people in these places, and use designs that wouldn't work in the United States, but are the practical and pragmatic ones in various countries. And what the surveys have shown over time is great stability in these measures. The numbers move in directions you would expect them to move, and so on and so forth.
One thing we haven't talked about as much, but has kind of been your bread and butter because of the media fascination with it, has been looking at American electoral politics over time, the presidential primaries and races over time. Do you have any great memories or stories that you trot out at cocktail parties that you want to share about? I mean, you're constantly asked to prognosticate about who's up, who's down, why they're up, why they're down, successes, failures, you know.
No, I mean,
it's a nerve-wracking business, I know, from having been in it for a while.
Yeah, I think that I always took very seriously the way we present material about the state of the race. We've always tried to do a very good job of that final estimate of what the presidential vote would be like. We've been right every time. I've had 3 bullseyes, 84, 2004, and 2008. And the importance of that is it's a clear demonstration of that this method still works despite all of the challenges that survey research faces. I mean, the completion rates in surveys every year go down. We've been studying completion rates at the Pew Research Center, and we know how terrible they are compared to 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago and 30 years ago. But the techniques that we use continue to make our surveys representative, not only with regard to the outcomes of presidential elections, which are more complicated than the typical measure, but if we look at things where there are known statistics, we hit the mark pretty well after our statistical adjustments, which doesn't mean that we're always going to do that. We know that the challenge of cell phones, which now represent like 40 or 50% of all the calls we do, it's a very difficult environment in which to do survey research compared to 10, 20 years ago.
Well, that's the other thing I was going to ask you about, because you guys have really, at Pew, taken it on yourselves to examine these problems. I think it's been very helpful for the rest of the industry that you guys are looking at it in a pretty clear-eyed way, saying, look, we're going to look at these gold standard surveys versus what a typical media survey is like, and we're going to tell you what you're missing. Where are we going? I mean, I guess I'm curious. You've been in this industry for several decades. You've seen a lot of changes. Like, what hurdles have we gotten over in the past, and what does that say about what we can do in the future?
Well, we're now coping with the cell phone challenge. We've been able to we've been able to do surveys on a regular basis.
Did you think that was going to happen, or were you concerned that was going to tank us?
We were very concerned about it working, and that, but it seems to work, and the completion rate is
Right.
Listen to the way I say this, it's no worse on cell phones, not much worse than on landlines. But I don't know about the future. I'm pretty confident. I remember once I was at a conference of Gallup International of all of the polling firms and that were part of our organization. And there was a man by the name of Hans Zetterberg, who was also a professor here. He's a sociologist. And he said to me, "Look around, Andy." He said, "You see all of these people? You know what their common quality is?" I said, "What, Hans?" He said, "They're survivors." There is a kind of survival capacity in the
for the roaches of
No, I mean, it means that we're adaptable.
Right.
I mean, when we were doing what we called modified probability samples in the 60s and 70s, late 60s and 70s, when I first got involved with AAPOR, people would look at, how can you possibly do that? You can't compute a chance error based upon a non-probability sample. And, you know, we found ways of, heuristically, we would do things and we would see that they work. If they didn't work, we'd do something different until we got the right model. And this field owes a lot to Paul Perry in figuring out how to do that. And, you know, we've made transitions before. We made the transition at Gallup from personal interview surveys, which was what we did, to phone surveys. And we were slower than the media polls in doing that, but there was a lot of concern that that transition wouldn't go well. But it has.
Do you think we'll go back? I mean, do you think your career will end where we started, that you'll be sending people door to door?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's so expensive and in many cases so dangerous to do. I don't think we'll be doing that.
What about AAPOR? We've talked a lot about your professional accomplishments. You've had a long involvement with AAPOR. You were president for a year. Is there anything you want to talk about on that score?
Sure. I always got a lot out of AAPOR. I love some of the people that I've met over the course of the years through AAPOR. Bud Roper, who encouraged me. I was not much of a participant in AAPOR, nor many people at Gallup in the early years. And
really?
Bud encouraged me to do so, and Al Gollin. These are names probably most of the and Warren, of course. Warren was a great buddy
Warren
of mine.
Matofsky.
Warren Matofsky. Warren and
famous
I
CBS pollster.
Yeah, we're not only colleagues, but we were close friends. We vacationed
partners
together.
in crime.
Partners in crime, and we were often ridiculed for our cranky behavior.
I don't know. I think Warren had you on that.
And you know, I got a lot of it out of AAPOR over the years.
And you were saying there were some changes that happened when you were president that you presided over.
Yeah, I think we instituted the seminars that take place.
The short courses.
The short courses.
Yeah, which have become a big revenue source for AAPOR.
And streamlined it a bit. I'm most proud of the fact that I conducted these AAPOR Executive Council meetings between 9 and 3, and we ended promptly at 3.
You better watch out. You'll get reelected on that plank. Last question. I read your AAPOR presidential address, and at the time you were saying, look, polling is under attack, and we're not doing a very good job standing up for ourselves.
Yeah.
Has that changed? Are we doing better, or...
I don't know. I think we had a period there where the attacks were more intense than they are now. There was so much criticism of polling. It's less so, but we weren't doing a good. I stand by my point. We weren't doing a good job of making the case for polls, and you know, public opinion surveys give. It's the old Gallup, the George Gallup's man, gives voice to the people. And over my career, I've seen it happen in a variety of ways. Some ways which would disappoint conservatives, other ways that would disappoint liberals. I remember in '88 being in at the Republican convention in there were 10,000 reporters and media people when it was announced that Dan Quayle was going to be the vice president of his vice presidential candidate. There was a groan from these states. It was an audible groan. And the stories were being written that Quayle would undermine Bush's electability. And, you know, we went out and did a survey 2 days later, and people said, you know, we don't care very much for Quayle. We don't think he's particularly qualified. But we're going to vote for Bush, not Dukakis. In '98, we saw...
And they did.
And they did. And we saw the extent to which public opinion supported President Clinton in the Lewinsky scandal, and that support emboldened Democrats to rally to him. Right. And the public didn't like the way he was conducting his personal life, but they liked the way he was conducting his presidency, and they were with him. And as we measured in '98, the Democratic Party in the last midterm of an incumbent president gained seats as opposed to all of the dire predictions that were being made. But public opinion told that story in a lot of ways, that if we relied on pundits and people who have a sense of public opinion, it would have never been told.
Yeah. Andy, it's a fascinating career. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Thanks to the folks here at the Kaiser Family Foundation for giving us the studio space and putting in their hours. And that's it for today.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you again.